Thank you very much for the kind invitation and introduction as well. It's really a great pleasure to be here. I must say that, yes, AI law is currently my passion in a way, but I'm by far not an expert. In fact, the book that you've just seen is about the European Artificial Intelligence Act, but I actually managed to write a whole book about only one sentence in the whole law, which says, I think, a lot about trying to be an expert in this field. It's very hard, and I think there are no experts yet. We are all like, I mean, we are interested, and I think everybody is and should be interested, and we're learning, and in other words, I would always consider myself an eternal student as well. I mean, the law is advancing so quickly, and the world is so diverse in terms of laws that a single life will not be enough, I think, to understand it all. But I would like to say that I would like to explain briefly why I came about this AI subject. It was actually, I would say, probably the logical result of previous work I've done. And it started 20 years ago in Italy, in Florence, where I did my PhD on the cultural industries. So it was about the regulation of cultural products in the World Trade Organization, in the EU, and also in NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And in this context, I also read about the background and tried to track back the origins of culture industry. And I found that there was a Frankfurt School of Thought, Max Horkheimer and Adorno. They published a book in which they used this term, and they intentionally coined it as an oxymoron. Do you know what is an oxymoron, everybody? It's quite a strange term. Here you see oxymoron, and it has, you see here from Google Ngram viewer, which means in books over like several centuries, the usage of it has increased a lot from the 1990s until now, more or less. So anyone knows what is an oxymoron? Can you tell me? Anyone? Have you heard about it? It's from ancient Greek.
Come on.
In fact, the oxymoron is itself an oxymoron. Because apparently in ancient Greek, oxys means smart, and moron in English, you know, it's not a good word, it's something not so smart. So it's a combination of smart and stupid, if you want. So an oxymoron is always when you have one word that combines two opposites, two terms of opposite meaning. And that's what Horkheimer did to culture industry. They said, well, the mass production of cultural products created a kind of contradiction in terms, because before Da Vinci's Mona Lisa was an original, and you couldn't make a copy instantly like we can do now with digital products. So I followed this over 20 years and then noticed that this term, wherever I looked, in any area of law, more and more of these terms were popping up of oxymoron, like soft law, for example. When law is soft, it's not law. So in international law, experts said soft law is an oxymoron. And there are many, many more. So there was also in 1995, there was James Rosenau. He wrote about governance in the 21st century. He said it's going to be an age of perplexing paradoxes, which is the cousin of oxymoron and also a kind of contradiction. And Charles Handy even called the 21st century an age of paradox. And that triggered in me the interest, is that a coincidence that so many areas, also in economics, in physics we have the uncertainty principle, in economics the culture industry, and in every area these contradictions in terms appeared. And I asked myself, does that have an impact on our legal reasoning? Because I was very much taught in terms of Aristotelian logic, it's either this or that. You cannot be guilty and innocent at the same time. It would be an oxymoron, right? So I followed this trend and published this book in 2018, in which I collected basically all the oxymoron I could find in not only, I started from the arts, like Shakespeare, he said, you know, an honest thief, kind of strange oxymoron. And then I looked at the arts in different areas, and then I looked at law in particular. And I found a lot of case law which also used this term, like fake news, old news, virtual reality. There is a long list nowadays of terms that are kind of oxymoronic, and AI is one of them. So here you see One book, she also qualified the term as an oxymoron because intelligence is something human, not something artificial, something of machines. There's a more recent article, even the title says AI is an oxymoron. So that is what triggered my interest in this AI Act when it came out in April 2021. And then I started actually reading this Article 5, which is, I think, the crucial provision of this act, because it's the provision that plans to prohibit certain AI. So it deems certain AI to be posing unacceptable risks to our fundamental values, to our fundamental rights, and that's why we need to not only regulate them, but even ban them and prohibit them. Because the AI Act takes a risk-based approach, says there are certain risks that are unacceptable, we have to ban it, then there's some high risk, there are some obligations you have to follow, and then some medium and low risk applications of AI. So basically that is the background of my interest in how I came to AI as such and the AI Act. In the meantime, and that was about August 2020, it was December 2021 that I started writing this book, and it was in April 2021 that the EU, the Commission, launched this proposal for this AI Act. So the AI Act is not yet law, it is still pending after more than 2 years. But what has happened since then is the list is growing longer in terms of global efforts to regulate AI. Before there were two kind of recommendations, the OECD principles, and UNESCO in November 2021 also adopted the recommendation on the ethics of AI. And this, I think, is a crucial text because it shows one thing, more than the OECD, because it's a universal international organization, UNESCO. It has 193 members, including China, and they managed to reach a consensus on this topic, shows that AI is a global concern, and it is of global concern, I think, as we can see from the increase in regulatory efforts that are also coming. So China, for example, also started the same way. They had some ethical norms, just let's look at it, let's try to be cautious, but nothing binding. But then in August already, they adopted as the first jurisdiction, or major jurisdiction at least, specific rules on generative artificial intelligence. They also launched a model law that is also out for discussion. And I think China followed the EU AI Act proposal very closely from the beginning. And then they quickly actually started with generative AI to be ready. Most recently, just about a week ago, the president of the US now claims to have adopted the first comprehensive legal act by an executive order on safe, secure, trustworthy AI. So you see, this is, I think, intensifying. Also, the Council of Europe is currently negotiating a convention on AI from a human rights perspective, not so much from the internal market perspective of the EU. So this is the current, I think, state of affairs, which shows that AI is a global concern, and also what I think it means is that it is no longer sufficient to just adopt guidelines or recommendations. We know from consumer protection or other areas of law, if you don't force some behavior, it will not change. And I think in the context of AI, we need to be very cautious when it comes to some of the effects AI can have. I was actually in May, I was in Rome, and I talked to a friend of mine, he's a lawyer in Rome, and he said, we discussed ChatGPT. I'm sure you follow that as well, that debate closely. And you know, it was launched in November, and it had 100 million users a month later. And then when you think about it, my friend in Rome, he said, if you want to open a gelateria in Rome, you probably have to wait 2 years to get all the permits, the hygiene, the fire department, and then you can start your business selling ice cream, right? And here you have a business model that is basically cross-boundary, cross-cultural, global, without any restriction. And luckily, I was very happy to see that the only regulatory authority that took action was the Italian one at the time. They banned it for some time, which was the right, I think, approach, because what apparently people are forgetting when we're dealing with these digital technologies is that we also have existing laws. We should enforce also existing laws to these. Just because a phenomenon is new, it doesn't mean it doesn't apply to that law. It would be like if I say, oh, the criminal code in Austria is from the 1960s, I was born in the 70s, it doesn't apply to me, right? No, we cannot think like that. But that's for another time. Maybe I want to move on and tell you something about this global regulation of AI. There is something that, where for me, the circle started to close again with oxymora and paradoxes. Strangely, when I started reading a lot about the regulation of new technologies, disruptive technologies, I realized that not only AI, but previous technologies, these disruptive technologies, very often come with paradoxes, contradictions. So for example, we have one here called The Paradox of Our Times by David Held, a political scientist. In his book Cosmopolitanism, he said, our time again, is it a coincidence that so many people, I think independently from each other, say this age is one of contradictions, of paradoxes, oxymoron, etc. He said, we are encountering many more global problems today. We just came out of a global pandemic, right? We have AI, we have climate change, we have internet threats to global peace and security everywhere. But we deal with these global issues in a very national, local, and on top of it, weak and incomplete way. And that's what he called the paradox of our times. And that relates to how should we regulate AI? Nationally, locally, regionally, globally? I think it's a very important question. Another aspect is also the temporal aspect. When should we regulate it? And you saw that the EU was first, but now the first might be the last, like in the Bible, right? Here we have two important paradoxes in a way which relate to new technologies that basically state that in the beginning there's always a hype. A few years ago we talked about self-driving cars. Then we talked about the Internet of Things. Now it's all AI. And yet we hype them in the beginning. We only focus on one. We then rush into regulation maybe, and then we underestimate the effects in the long run, because first, some of the expectations don't materialize. And we had that with AI. There was a race for the development of AI. And then we thought it's going to solve all the problems, sustainable development, etc. Also, bias, discrimination, machines don't discriminate. No, now we realize, it's not that easy. And that is a very important question, because we need to adopt laws that are future-proof, which means that they last longer than the technology, at least, that they aim to regulate. So another question is that why? And here we have some, I think, connected paradoxes of that sometimes we regulate something for a certain reason, but it turns out to frustrate and maybe even hamper the realization of these goals. So for example, one example you often find for these unintended consequences of a law is that now you see that the access to your email account, to your bank account, the security measures have increased a lot. You cannot use a password shorter than 12 symbols or something. You have this authentication process with SMS to your phone. And what was the result? Most of us write down the passwords. So actually a shorter password in your mind was maybe better protected than one of 100 written in your booklet or under the desk, right? So you see that sometimes we achieve something, we seek to achieve something, and we receive the opposite outcome. And this is also important in the context of especially trust, because the AI Act seeks to enhance the trustworthiness of AI, and now I think we're becoming, after hyping it, we're becoming more suspicious of it, and we'll see that later. Another question is also like, one thing that is very important to me in this debate is, because we are in a debate, and that's why these events are so important, because we all haven't understood what is happening yet with us because of AI. Because ChatGPT is there for just a few months or a year now. But how it transforms all our lives has not yet been understood at all. And what I always tell my students is, for example, we buy those devices with the sole perspective of what can I do with it. I can take pictures, I can my food, I can upload all these things. but we never really think of what does it do to me? What does it do to my time? To how I sleep maybe, and how I relate to my friends. Now it's all in the virtual life, but not in the real life anymore. So we have to take a step back and also wonder a bit, why is this, what is this technology doing to us, and why are we so much hyping it and pursuing it? And here I think we see a lot of interesting metaphors of like Homo Deus. The book was also like into this area. Google's acting as a god, we can predict everything, and so on and so forth. And that will become very important in what I will talk about later. Another problem, I want to say here, is this convergence. One problem is with AI, first of all, how do we define it? And where does it end, right? And like I said, before it was the Internet of Things, and that is also progressing very quickly. And AI is now in many more things, and all of it is connected. And you will see later with AI, as I will discuss it, that AI itself is maybe harmless, but the combination with other neurotechnologies can become very serious in terms of the effects it has on our lives, on our freedom of thought even, and maybe our freedom of will, if we have ever had such a thing. There are many problems in the regulation of these new technologies and of AI, and very often I think it's not a coincidence that they are oxymoron, because they also lead to paradoxical answers and responses. And I think this should also start a debate about the deeper layers of our thinking, which logic we apply. And here I can maybe talk about it later a bit, that what is very often kind of in a simplistic way said is that, you know, Europe follows the Aristotelian logic of it's either this or that, and Asia, China is more in the Confucian logic of it's both and thinking. And that is a very important debate also happening. And I think we see a lot of problems today that have to do with convergence of products, that it's both cultural and it's commercial, it's both artificial and it is human, and we can no longer easily say this belongs to this area, this belongs to that area. We are creating a very complex reality, maybe a virtual reality, or one that is both virtual and real at the same time. And that's the crucial thing. We can discuss that hopefully later, but now I want to enter to my book and what it is about. It is about subliminal AI. Do you know what is subliminal? Sublimen, Latin. You should, my students in China, they don't know, but you should know what is sub and limen. Below a certain threshold, right? It's below the threshold of our awareness. So our consciousness is divided, if we want, apparently. I would refrain from thinking it's either this or that. It's both below that threshold and above the threshold. So it's sub and supraliminal, I think, at the same time. And this is what triggered my interest, and I actually started writing an article. I thought I'd write an article of 5,000 words about this one sentence in the act, and then it became a book, and the publisher said I cut 20,000 words again to fit it in this series. So it became still, I think, a book nevertheless. And I start by saying this popular, I don't know if you've heard it, if you don't control your mind will control you. It's all my time in India, you know, I tried to learn how to control my own mind. But then I learned that so much of our awareness is actually hidden. Then I thought, like, if we have access to this level of awareness below the threshold of awareness, then if you can tap into that, you have much more. And it is, some people say, up to 95% of our cognitive functions are below that threshold of awareness. Isn't it like when you watch TV, right? And then after the news becomes commercials, right? What I do is I go to the refrigerator, refill my ice cream, and wait for the movie to continue. Because when we see commercial, we are defensive. I don't want to be advertised. I don't want to be a subject to that. But then you watch the movie, and then there's this product placed there and this product there. Watch any like franchise, James Bond or something, it's full of product placement. And then we are no longer in this defensive mood. And then we see he wears cool sunglasses, and next time I buy these sunglasses. This is subliminal kind of perception. And I will get to that in a second. On top of it, the news are now full with AI being able to intrude and even better understand how the mind works. And it's misleading because it's not just AI. It's AI combined with other neurotechnologies like functional magnetic resonance imaging, BCI, brain-computer interfaces maybe, but also big data, the Internet of Things, and many more technologies you will see. And this continued my interest. And then I also remembered, of course, Orwell, who said like private life, to be with all these cultural industries, the media that I had studied 20 years ago. And then I saw a parallel that now what is happening is that not only private life is coming to an end, but maybe the privacy of our thoughts is coming to an end. And when you study this whole history of subliminal perception and advertising in particular, you really question whether we have free will and we ever had a chance in defending ourselves from influence here. So I wrote privacy of thought might have become an oxymoron here, and we need to maybe also protect something like cognitive liberty. We need maybe a new fundamental right, because we have freedom of thought in the European Convention of Human Rights, but it's actually a bit of there's a great article, it calls it a forgotten right, because it's in the shadow of, I think, freedom of conscience and religion so far. Now we have a new threat. It's not like that you may feel your thoughts, your religion or something, your freedom is hampered there. It's really like through machines, maybe your thoughts can be manipulated, and with your thoughts, your behavior. There's also, after that, a year later, this book came out. She also writes that the battle is now for your brain. Neurotechnology will become the control for all our interactions with technology. And she also calls for privacy and freedom of thought and self-determination. So this is really becoming a concern. Here's this article, another article that also calls this freedom of thought and legal enigma. I think we need to redefine its meaning and adapt it to the 21st century. And this is also because the technologies are becoming really like sophisticated in being able to influence and also manipulate our thoughts. So I put here subliminal AI, Kai is German, but AI, among all these other computer technologies that are already being developed for a long time to alter our behavior. And we will see a few more examples later. The advantage of, and this is where I see continuity between the cultural industries that Adorno or Horkheimer wrote about in the 1940s and today, it's the same thing. It's just becoming more and more sophisticated and more efficient. And one of the advantages is that it is interactive. We are now not just seeing, watching, consuming a movie, watching a billboard with an advertisement. We are interacting with these chatbots and with the internet and all these websites, etc., etc. So this is very important because it's easy to influence someone if you interact, and because the connection, the information flow goes both ways. So that is basically a bit of the background and what I also question. And I see nevertheless that there is also an important aspect where we need to address the issue from a broader perspective, not just looking at AI, and we can maybe discuss that too if there's time. First, let me go back to the UNESCO recommendation. I said it's an important document because it's the global, it elevates the problem to a global concern. But it also recognizes something very important in the first recital already. First of all, it's not just positive, it's not just good, it also has negative effects. And we start to accept and to understand them better and even recognize them. And then they talk about the impact on everything. Societies, the environment, ecosystems, the economy is missing, but on all aspects of our human lives. That is, I think, pretty sure. It's a cross-cutting issue. But they emphasize also including the human mind. And I think this is very important that they emphasize this and recognize that there's really a danger of influencing the way we think, the way we act and interact, and the way we decide. So basically this is manipulation. And by manipulation I don't mean a positive or negative, because manipulation is again, is a neutral term in many ways. We manipulate in many ways ourselves too, but it can be used for both ways. And this is just the background, and then I jump immediately to the AI Act and to this Article 5, which lists these prohibited AI practices. So those AI systems that the EU wants to see prohibited. And the first one is the one I wrote the book about. It's just this one that says an AI system that deploys subliminal techniques beyond a person's consciousness. You will see the full text later. And then another one is an AI system that exploits vulnerabilities. I think the two are very related. They should have actually been, I think, combined in my view, because otherwise you have a danger that you might have a situation when you look at them separately, none of them is violated, but in practice both might be violated. And that might even extend to all four. The third one is so-called social scoring systems, and the fourth one is biometric identification systems. And this is where I say, I even wrote an article, a shorter one, published this year, early this year, where I argue exactly that we need to maybe be more like comprehensive here in order for some real problems to be addressed and really manage some prohibition. On the other hand, the problem is if it's too comprehensive, too broad, you might hamper innovation. And that also is a problem. So we need to maybe also change the way we think about it. But that is for another time. And let me just give you this one provision that I wrote about. It is about placing on the market, putting into service an AI system that deploys, so any technique that kind of tries to access your awareness below, your cognition below the level of awareness. It's a very strange formulation. You know, soup means below, right? But then they say beyond a person's consciousness. So if it's below, beyond is very different. So I suggest in the book, we should have called it transliminal, for example. Because if you use subliminal, it might only address those techniques that we cannot recognize. But manipulation happens both subliminally and supraliminally at the same time. But that's one problem. Then it continues, like it has to distort and change the way we behave. And that behavior change has to cause, or be likely to cause, that the person or another person suffers a physical or psychological harm. This phrase has also been criticized by many commentators, and they said this is too narrow. For example, the question of harm. Maybe what about emotional harms? What about cultural harms? What about all kinds of societal harms? Think about Cambridge Analytica, or if you have a technique to manipulate voters' behavior and to manipulate a whole election, and then everything goes down the wrong way, and we suffer a financial disaster because of that manipulated election, for example. How would this harm be kind of compensated for, right? Or we have to ask here a very good question in terms of what type of harm. Another aspect I discuss in the book is what about cumulative harm? Because when you drink Coca-Cola, one glass, maybe not very harmful, but if you drink it 100 times every day, it will accumulate a negative effect. Or, even more problematic, maybe Coca-Cola is not unhealthy, but if you drink it with Mentos every morning, I don't know, at least on YouTube you see these bubbles coming out, then who is liable now? Is it Mentos, or is it Coca-Cola, or is it both, or none? Or what do we do? So there's a whole debate we could have on this. I will focus already on a very broad problem and the regulatory challenges that I encounter. So first of all, there are serious legal problems with the regulation of this kind of AI only, subliminal AI. Namely, which AI? How do we define it? Especially when we see how quickly these AI systems evolve. ChatGPT, every 3 months there is an upgrade and it becomes more and more intrusive in many ways, or efficient, or whatever, powerful. How does it relate to other acts? I think here we have a huge challenge to lawyers in particular, because even the Commission, I think nobody in the Commission can oversee anymore how the AI Act relates to maybe the Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, the GDPR. There is one field after the other. We used to separate them very nicely, but now ChatGPT may be a threat to copyright, to competition law, to tax law, to any profession can use it. So it should be also regulated for lawyers, for financial advisors, for every field you can use it. It's a cross-cutting problem. So we need to really understand for the future where the law stands, how do we use it, and what are all the connections between areas of law that we used to separate for a very long time. The question of causality, like I mentioned, harm, fundamental rights, a major problem here has already been pre-AI that there is a principle of the indivisibility of fundamental rights. Have you heard of that? That, you know, in fact you can't divide them. Ironically, in international law we then split them in a covenant on international political rights and another one on economic, social and cultural rights. But what it means here is that we can only say that one fundamental right is guaranteed if all others are guaranteed. And that is a conceptual problem. It's the same with sustainable development, by the way. There are 17 goals. And it was funny, I was in a conference in China and then they made a mistake on the slide and they put only sustainable development goal without S. And then the audience says, oh my God, we need to add the S. And I said, no, that's fine. There's only one goal of sustainable development. Namely, you have to realize all 17 of them. Otherwise, it's still a fail, right? So, a lot to discuss. And then, the biggest problem for a subliminal AI is how do we enforce it? How do we detect it? If it's something that by definition we don't notice because it's below the level of our awareness, how do we detect and then how do we complain? How does a complaint then lead to enforcement? And the irony was I wrote an email to many regulatory authorities for advertisement in Europe television because there's a prohibition since 1989 all over Europe. And then most of them didn't reply. Actually, those who replied said we have no cases. And the Austrian regulatory authority wrote and said we had once a complaint about an advertising for dog food which used subliminal sounds to attract dogs. So maybe you watched that advertisement and your dog started to be extremely excited. You didn't know why. And then the regulatory authority decided to close the case because actually it was the dog being manipulated and not a human, so the dog is not the subject under the law, so we don't need to enforce it, right? So that shows the dilemma here. Then it comes to the next point, and that's why this whole area of AI law is extremely complicated, is because it's an interdisciplinary challenge. You can't deal with that. That's why I can't say I'm an expert. I'm a total lay person in that sense, because I had to understand what is subliminal perception. I had to first, and I will share with you what I found. Then another big question that I think the Commission had not looked into is simply based on which senses is our perception subliminal. Is it only what we see? You saw before this popcorn and Coca-Cola experiment. I didn't mention it, but did you hear about that experiment? This was an experiment that was said to be conducted in the 50s, where they showed in a cinema like a movie, and in between they flashed images of popcorn and Coca-Cola so fast that the eyes could detect it. It went to the brain, but your awareness did not capture it. And then the people went out and then they saw some products, and then 60% more were said to have bought these products that were flashed in front of them. So it's not only, I will show you some examples about what you see, it's also about what you hear. Which senses do we have? How many senses do we have? Etc. So how do we approach that? And then where do we draw the line between subliminal and supraliminal perception? That's a big question. It's like if you enforce a speed limit, right? On the highway it says no more than 130. You have to know if I drove 150, well, you pay a fine. If it was 129, you're okay. But here, where do we draw the line? Very important question. And then the last issue is, I try to also look at, again, what is AI in technical terms? Because when I talk to technical experts, they had a very different understanding from lawyers. And then, which technologies deploy such subliminal techniques? Are there some already out there? And what about future ones? I said one crucial question for law is, how do we future-proof it? We must make sure that the law is not just applied today or efficient today, but also 3 months from now. And that's why the AI Act is delayed, I think, because ChatGPT created a fear that maybe the AI Act does not cover this new technology. And it was a matter of a few months in many ways. And then again, we could discuss a lot of more aspects about future technologies and what they mean. I try to go through that rather quickly because time, I think, is soon over. First, I want to say what I found is that the subliminal perception is extremely important because 95% or more are happening below that threshold of awareness. So we do a lot more things than we thought in a way that we are not fully aware of it. And it's a matter of efficiency. But it is, if this is the case, and if you have access to controlling subliminal cognition, you have access to 95% of a person's cognitive functions. That's much more than the 5% where you show the advertisement of buy this, buy that. That's not efficient. This is really efficient. And just to let you know, I traced it back to the 1930s, 40s. In Vienna, actually, there was an Austrian psychologist who was one of the first to have been able to prove that what you perceived subliminally was retained. And so people saw an image, this is what they saw, and then they were asked 3 days later, the eyes saw it, but they flashed it also so fast that you were not aware of it, and then they were asked 3-4 days later to draw their dreams, and that is what they drew. And that was how he was able to show that this information was retained, even like through the sleep. And then this information came to the US. And in the US, they were not so much interested in the psychology of it, they were more interested in how can we make money out of that. And how can we use that for marketing. And this Mr. James Vickery was said to have conducted these Coca-Cola experiments. And to cut a long story short, there was also another book in the 50s, very interesting, by Packard. He called them hidden persuaders. These are tools that can, from secret positions, affect your mind, and that can be used to market. But he also already said in the 1950s, this can be used to promote politicians in elections. So we can use subliminal messages to affect voters' behavior. So that's just a long time before Cambridge Analytica, for example. So the awareness was already there. In the meantime, you probably know that some advertisements, when, for example, tobacco advertising was banned, right? Some were quite creative and created these barcodes. Do you know which brand that is? You probably don't even know anymore. This generation luckily doesn't know anymore. It's something prohibited in advertising. It is cigarette tobacco. And what it did was, when the car was flashing in front of the camera, the cars are very fast, they were kind of subliminally creating the association with this advertisement. And this is just one example. There are many more in logos, for example, that there are subliminal messages in a way. Amazon connects A and Z, sells you everything from A to Z and so on and so forth. And cutting here a very long story short, advertisement on TV using these subliminal techniques is prohibited since 1989 in all of the European countries of the Council of Europe and the EU as well. But not in the US, and we'll come back to that later. What is important is that nowadays subliminal advertising techniques are much more sophisticated, and these experiments of James Vickery, there was a long controversy basically from the 1950s till the year 2000 in the US, whether this is actually efficient, or is it just a voodoo, spooky myth. It wasn't even sure whether he conducted these experiments. There is a whole strange controversy about that. But I would say that studies nowadays replicated some of these experiments, and there is scientifically very little doubt that it is efficient, in fact. The only question is, how efficient is it, and when, and in which situations can it be more efficient? And obviously, you will see that later, we are sometimes more vulnerable. So for example, if you're thirsty, you will be probably more likely to fall for subliminal advertisement for Coca-Cola than when you just had like 2 beers. Then you will not be affected by that, and so on and so forth. But basically you see here some citations from some of these journals in marketing and so on. They say that it is already quite efficient and it can be expected to enhance the efficiency of subliminal stimuli, with particularly combining it with your big data and so on and so forth, and other information that is being stored. So one commentator has put it quite nicely. We have now moved from programming computers to programming people, and brain-computer interfaces and so on are the next step. AI can read your mind and so on and so forth. I want to go back briefly to the 1990s. In the US there were also some interesting developments, but it never led to a legislative action and the prohibition of these subliminal techniques. There was a case there were several cases against rock bands which were accused of having recorded backward some messages on their music, which had sadly caused the death or attempted suicides of teenagers. And that the parents of those teenagers who lost their lives tried to sue them, and they couldn't win the case because it wasn't clear whether there was causality between this hidden message and backwarded recorded messages on the music. And here you see that for the brain, this is interesting, it doesn't matter so much in which direction we read stuff, as long as the first and the last letter are correct. So I'm sure you can all read that, even though the letters are completely messed up, except for the first, right? According to a research at Cambridge, etc., etc. So that shows that it is very likely that you can be also, when you receive auditory messages below a certain threshold of awareness, to influence your behavior. That brings me to this question of what is subliminal perception and where do we draw the line? And apparently I found this area of psychophysics which studies exactly whether there is such an absolute threshold that divides our subliminal, 95% maybe, and the supraliminal, like awareness of our cognition. And cutting a very long story short, they do that for all the 5 senses, the known senses, like seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling, touching, and came to the conclusion that it doesn't exist. So basically it's like you drive on the highway and the carabinieri stop you, and then they say, well, you know, you exceeded the speed limit, but the speed limit is floating, or like it's not clear, and then you would say, well, that's not in line with the principle of legality, and so I wouldn't pay, right? So how would we enforce this if we can't even draw a line where an AI would be or superliminal? So this is a very simple but conclusion of a lot of research here. What I also question in the book is then, and what I found is that the history of the study of the senses is very narrow, in the sense that we always focused on one sense rather than looking at how the senses interact with each other. And we could discuss a lot about that too. And we have, for example, here this image. Did you remember that? That was quite viral. Do you see black and blue, white and gold? Anyone black and blue? You see? That's a very interesting example also of a paradoxical image. A horror of, if you ask me for any police or a judge, if you listen to witnesses and someone committed a crime in this dress, and then half of the people you interrogate say, was there someone wearing a black and blue? And no, it was white and gold, and they talk about the same thing. It's scary, and we know in law enforcement that the visual sense is very much too overused, and therefore leads to an error margin of 30%, for example, in police lineups. People identify the wrong people in 30% of the cases. That's why I think we also need, if we want to regulate AI and these questions of future neurotechnologies, and especially augmented and virtual reality, we need to also redefine the way we start studying the senses. And I use synesthesia here. Do you know what synesthesia is? It means to sense together, but it's a condition that many people have, and we are not aware of it. I think we all are born with it in a sense, but we're very often forced to unlearn it. But it is basically when a stimulus in one sense, you listen to music, you start seeing colors. Or you read a text and you see different letters in different colors. Maybe some of you have it, or you were not aware of it, and you have it. And there are 55 known forms of it, and I think it is something we should use as a metaphor how to study the future, the senses in the future, namely in combination and not only in isolation. That's very crucial for the success of the regulation of subliminal AI systems. So the last part is what technologies are out there. And we keep reading now these news reports that AI is able to read your mind, is already reconstructing your sentences that go through your mind. And there's a lot of progress made here. And in the past it was more like intrusive, even you implanted something, but now you can just put electrodes. And I think it's very likely that we can even do that remotely. For example, in biometrics already, we use behavioral biometrics, not just the fingerprint, the iris scan, your lips or something. We can identify a person from the way the person to be mouse or hits the keyboard. You sit in an internet cafe in New Delhi, and if you connect this with some data, you can find out it's me, you know. And if you can combine that with other past information that you collected on social media, maybe from people, you can profile them very well and create personalized advertisement content that will really be efficient and able to manipulate the human mind in many ways. And we should not forget that this is the whole purpose of AI. In the past, we created technologies to create, in a way, to enhance our physical abilities, but now it's about our mental, the human, like mind, and we are reproducing that. But we should also not forget why we do that, and do research not only on what we can do with that, but also what it does to us. So, cutting a very long story short again, I would say we need to look at this definition, but also look at it in combination with many more technologies and problems that we have already recorded. For example, how search engines manipulate our behavior, how eye tracking, brain computer, big data, Internet of Things, etc. All this can be used and is already being used to change our behavior. Let me just show you another example, which is, I think, quite synonymous with subliminal AI. I don't know if you've heard about dark patterns. These are some reports by the EU, by the OECD about these practices in the internet that make you kind of change your behavior and buy things you actually didn't want to buy. It's like all these, you know, like kind of misleading advertisement, you know. Very often you see 90% off and actually they increase the price 120% a week before, so it's actually hardly a good deal. Contrast effects, maybe you've heard about that. You put some things in a very like remote connection and then it looks cheap, etc. And many such pop-ups, or you buy an airline ticket, it says $9.99 and by the end you finish the booking, it's $99 because you have to add the luggage, the toilet, the food, etc. So all these are tricks, psychological tricks that influence the way we act as consumers. And let me show you one example of a hotel booking site. This is interesting because this is not a subliminal technique. This is just, I think, a very supraliminal way of manipulating our behavior. Here's a hotel in Macau. So first you see popular, last booked 12 hours ago. So this is popular, it must be cool. Many people want to book it. Then you see 61% off today. You know, so well, this price could be from the peak season in Christmas or something. And now we are in October, maybe, you know. And that price is not a bargain at all in October. It is a bargain maybe in the peak season, Chinese New Year or something, but not on that day. But you already think, wow, if it's 60% off, that's already, I saved so much money, I'll buy that. And if that didn't work on you, you will also see some further things. First of all, no risk, okay, you can cancel anyways, but our last 5 rooms, and now you get stressed. I usually, when I come to a conference, then I get stressed. I want to live near the conference venue, and then only 5 rooms, and I know there are 200 other conference participants who are looking at the website right now. You know, they say there are 20 people looking at it right now, and you're like, I click, and then you bought. So this is already highly efficient to mislead you. But now let me show you what happened in the study which use subliminal effects. So for example, some hotel sites, they show you a 360-degree video of the room. And they took 30 people, they saw this video of the room, and then asked them, would you book that? And then they took another 30 people, they showed them the same video, but here they embedded only one smiley, just that yellow face, subliminal. So people watch the video, notice the same as the other 30 people, but there was, in your brain, retained the information of a smiling face over the bedroom, right? So you would wake up with a smile. And here apparently a high percentage of these test persons was willing to book this room, much higher than this. So it proved that this was possible. And then here's another example from this book by Rodinov on Subliminal. It's quite interesting, where they also used a combination of AI, data and PCI to reconstruct images that people were shown, and then what the computer chose in what comes close to that. So you see a high degree of similarity. And that was already conducted 12 years ago, so I'm pretty sure it is much more sophisticated now. There's another experiment I found in a study from 2012 too, about brain spyware. And this is a kind of experiment that was demonstrated in the lab, illustrating that you can hack into the brain, deduce private information like birthday, banking, PIN codes, your passwords, your residency, everything. And this type of attack can also be performed subliminally without you being aware of it. Right? So they are already able to, in the lab, to extract some very personal information from your mind through some of these technologies in combination and with maybe subliminal stimuli. I'm always wondering, for example, I don't know if you get that on Facebook, sometimes they ask this question, like, there is no English word with double O. Have you seen something like that? And then you say like, moon, of course, there are many, spoon, right? Yeah, exactly, but you see, very interesting. This might be recorded for later purposes in what is your association with that term, you know? Like, that tells a lot about the person already. You gave a lot away now with the taboo, right? I tried to pick moon, something very, very harmless, right? But if you do that over 3 years, 20 times, you already have a good profile, and then you can use this. Maybe this is your password. Now you should change your password tonight of your computer. So all these experiments show that there are already such technologies, and I think in the future we will read every month from now many more such tools and applications coming out, especially through the application of several kind of products at the same time. So health devices, right? I was just in the World Internet Conference in China, and there was an app which you looked into for 30 seconds, and just by looking at your face, it estimated your age, your heart rate, your breath rate, it predicted your cholesterol, your diabetes level, etc. So basically, you know, you sit in front of your computer, anyone could have access to your camera or something, and you can read a lot into your... And if you're wearing a wearable health device, well, there you go, you already consented to it even, to share this data, and you can combine that. Then you can measure, you show some advertisement, you measure the heart rate goes up, he likes maybe this sports car, and then you see this sports car all the time. Or it happens already, I go with my wife into a shop to buy a piano for our son, and I didn't use my mobile phone at all. But my wife, she scanned some code and then looked at the shop, and the next day I had the same advertisement information on my Facebook account. So they know, it's a wife, you know, the wife controls the purse, so you better buy this or not, etc. And interestingly, as a last step, there is a paradox in my view that, and we've seen that already with machines, that we thought algorithms would be neutral, would not discriminate, and AI too, these tools can be kind of subliminally manipulated. So there are these adversarial attacks, there was given information to me by some researchers, where you can show such an image of noise to an AI system, and then it, instead of recognizing this image as a dog, it becomes an ostrich. And interestingly, there were experiments, you could do that with sunglasses. I could put a pattern on my frame, and then a biometric facial recognition system would think I'm Rosavinici and not myself. And you can do that also with makeup, apparently. Like you can put a certain pattern on your face and then you become another person. So you can again circumvent everything that is also created to increase our security. So in the end, nothing is safe. So how do we conclude? In order to stick to the time, I think we need to think about these technologies a bit like the black box. We learned that already from the Black Box Society, this book by Frank Pasquale. We already have a lot of algorithms that take decisions for us without our awareness. Like you apply for a loan, the bank doesn't give you, maybe there is already some algorithm that uses information that has nothing to do with what you ever did in your life. But it's because your name, your location of where you live, you're discriminated, etc., etc. So we should not be, first of all, naive in the sense that we think these technologies are neutral and are not harmful and only beneficial. That's one thing. So we know that there's bias in human data and all this machine learning, and there are different forms of this bias, and we need to therefore, I think, reflect on not only what we can do with these things, but also what they do to us. And there the law plays an important role, I think, because the regulation can help to protect us against some of these problems. To cut very short this, what the findings of my book, I would say, for me, the crucial thing is, first of all, perception is multisensory. We haven't even understood how the mind works fully. We know that there is no absolute threshold. What they said is that you and I, we have very different perception, and not only that, I have very different perception. Today I have a jet lag from 16 hours travel. My perception is probably, my level is very low. I'm not very aware of what's happening around me. But maybe tomorrow I slept well, I ate well, I will be much better. Subliminal techniques, they are being used. There's a long history of them, and they're scientifically proven to be efficient. We just, we probably now enhance the efficiency from 50 to 90%. And maybe it will be very close to 100% in a few years from now. So AI is an oxymoron, I think, and it is not safe and trustworthy at all. Unless we can trust ourselves completely as humans, I think we shouldn't trust machines at all. That's another paradox. And the question is how to regulate it. Here, this article, I think, is a good step to start thinking about what is freedom of thought? How does it relate to, our understanding of human beings? We need to update our understanding of humans and bring it in line with scientific findings. I think this whole question of how we study the senses, what is the human mind, what is human perception, do we have free will, all these, in many ways, scientific but also philosophical questions need to be raised now in a very broad and inclusive debate. And here this article, you see, makes a lot of suggestions also that we need to have human oversight in order to make it trustworthy. I think it's very important to recognize it's a cross-boundary problem. You cannot do it alone. Yes, the EU should do it. It was good to promote that AI Act. It started a big trend, a global debate about AI, but it cannot do it alone. Even if you make it, extraterritorial and so on, you need to engage with all, especially the big players, China, US, Japan, etc., India. You need to engage in a very active debate, legislative also. And you need to also, I think, in many ways, answer a lot of legal questions, but we also, most of all, we need to change the way we think about it. And then, ultimately, I've drawn here a map that I try to show that, for example, the definition that in technology circles that is used is AI is basically anything that looks like it's human. And I think there will be a lot more things coming very soon that fall within AI. So we need to be kind of innovative if you want to regulate it in a future-proof way. And unfortunately for lawyers, it's bad news, because I think we cannot do it through one area of law only. We need to redefine and probably adapt the whole legal system to our new reality. And that is really something, I don't know how to achieve that myself, but I think we should, at least now, coordinate better between these areas. For example, we see this with generative AI. There's a big debate about, does it infringe copyright? And at the same time, we're also wondering, should we give AI copyright? protection. If you create something with ChatGPT, you know, I just read that Amazon restricted recently the upload of self-published books to 3 books per day. I mean, who can write 3 books per day? I tried, I wrote 7 books, but I never managed to do 3 in one day. And that shows you that this is now, you know, like everybody can be a publisher, a writer in a few hours, right, or less. So we need to look at this in a very broad context, and I just isolated a few areas. Here, another big question would be, and I see a lot of controversy, should we regulate it comprehensively, like the EU, saying there's an AI Act for all AI, not just AI in the health sector or in the financial sector. I think it's the right approach. We have to start from there, but then we also need specific regulation when AI has specific impacts on certain areas, like health maybe or something, or the financial sector, etc. So again, it's not, I see so much debate about it's either this or that. Again, we need both at the same time. And we need, most of all, a very inclusive, broad debate in the spirit of, in a way, synesthesia, I think, is a good metaphor here, that we need to understand that our perception, our life in society, even I think the whole law, is based on what I call consensus, because consensus also means, you know, sensing together, and that's what synesthesia stands for. And just to show you here, this is a great book which says exactly where our mistakes are. We are having, our reality is a multisensory one. For example, I forgot to mention one experiment I read about, which is also very interesting, about subliminal effects, is about subliminal touch. I used to wait in a cafe once. If I had known, I would have used that, because apparently if you serve people drinks and you subliminally touch them, which means without them noticing it really, the tip went up 40% or more. So it shows clearly how we are influenced by some actions that we don't focus on, because you look at maybe the menu, but you're not noticing that someone serves you and touches you. And in Macau, for example, when you go into the casinos, they all put a fragrance into their AC, their air conditioning system. And when you get a jackpot, or you have a nice experience, a lovely romantic Valentine dinner, and you inhale that smell, and next time you pass by, even in front of the door, it triggers a memory. And you go back because you want to re-experience this kind of romantic, or the money, or whatever. So we need to do a lot of things here in order to fully and successfully regulate AI. And I think synesthesia, I've also written about that separately, can be used for many fields now. For AI, we need to look at the senses. For augmented reality, for example, it was also found to be very useful to detect deepfakes, which can also be created with AI, right? So you can, only when you look at the sound, the image, the facial movements, and so on together, you can maybe detect deepfakes. So it shows a multisensory approach is definitely more efficient than just looking at it from one angle. And here I stop, so that we have maybe some questions and a discussion. So thanks a lot.
Okay, so thank you, Professor Neuwirth, and now floor is open, as usual. Professor Neuwirth is ready to answer your questions and to listen to your comments and so on and so forth. So, please.
Everything clear?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Chiara.
Yeah.
Okay, I have 2 questions, but one at local level and the second one at international global level. Okay, the first one. Okay, it's all about liability. Okay, we have, like in Italy and in other countries in Europe, a law based on codes. Okay, so our code is and our law is more like predictive. Okay, of crimes or other. Okay, less it. I don't call it in English. Okay, so then this technology is new. We don't know the future perspectives and risks, and it's all about, it's not like internet or other stuff that we control, but AI is more like based on self-learn. And so we teach this technology as how to learn our brain. Okay, it's like our brain, but we don't know how it develops. Okay, because it's continuous self-learning. So in terms of liability and our law, how we can predict these risks and write new laws to, like, for example, if a car, self-driving car, is a great invention, okay, but a self-driving car kills somebody, a pedestrian, then who's liable for that? The sviluppatore. Yeah.
The AI or
the AI, yeah, okay. So that at a local level, based on our code. Then international level, we could do like for the space economy. We do like an international agreement, a sort of a global agreement that we all knew what we're doing there, okay, in the space. So I thought about like China or new superpowers, okay. They have this AI technologies like more developed of us. They could use it against us or against the other superpowers. How we could control that, like China could control us. Okay, there is also this main object, and how we could agree all in the world of the states, like there is no infiltration, okay, in other states, in other yeah, right. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes. No, these are very good questions. I tried to, but first the liability question. I'm not a private lawyer and I haven't looked at this myself much, but I mentioned it, the problem of how do we establish causality? When is something like causal to an effect that harms us, right? Like with Coca-Cola combined with Mentos or something, who is to blame? And here we have really one thing, and that leads already to your second question. It's a global technology, and it's mass manipulation 24/7, globally, basically. So we need to redefine, I think, what we mean by causality. I remember 20 years ago I had a colleague in Florence who was writing his thesis about emotional harm already. It was difficult to prove, you know, you booked a hotel on a beautiful island and then you are harmed because the view is not as you expected it, right? And then you try to sue the hotel or the agency. And I remember that he said, like, you know, it's very hard to prove, of course, emotional harm, right? And the judges are reluctant maybe to enter that because we don't have scientific proof for that harm. But here we forget that these technologies, they can already measure a lot of things, emotional stress, your heartbeat and all this, like your whole health. I saw it in China now, you know, like how it scanned my face in 30 seconds and could tell about my cholesterol level. So can we not use that also? We need to make sure that the progress in the technology that we use to manipulate, for example, behavior, for good or bad, it doesn't matter, you know. But we also develop these technologies and use them to prove what effects they have, you know. And it seems to me, and that's the problem, that there is a bit of an imbalance, of course, because regulators, they don't have the know-how, they don't have the resources. Law enforcement, I mean, or governments, they don't know what are these technologies and how we can use them. But these big tech giants, they have whole departments of psychologists and of neuroscientists, and they have their expertise. And here we have to, and that's, I think, the only way to control a little bit of these developments is to regulate it, because otherwise we leave it to the private sector in particular, or also to some governments that are in control of maybe of some of these technologies, and that is definitely dangerous. And to answer the global question, I have just been in China in this World Internet Conference, and President Xi Jinping also mentioned the global initiative, and then in the UK the Prime Minister also invited many countries to discuss it. The only way of containing some of these and controlling some of the negative side effects of a lot of these technologies is through global cooperation and communication. Which legal instrument internationally we have, I'm afraid we don't have very efficient ones. We already know this in the last 70 years, even in dynamic areas like my area was WTO law, trade law. It reformed quite a bit since the 1947, but it also, the WTO was created in 1995 and is outdated because it was established in pre-internet times, right? And they can't deal with e-commerce, digital commerce, etc. We cannot use the same instruments anymore of treaties, customary international law to regulate AI. We need to engage in I think in a constant global process of communication, like in different fora, and here we should also reform the whole UN, our global governance system. You know, we are too divided between UNESCO, the World Trade Organization, World Health Organization. Everybody adopts documents on AI. No, you need to discuss it together. I think the ultimate effect or the ultimate purpose of AI is to make us aware of the fact that we are all in the same boat in this, as a humanity. I mean, I don't know, I don't see that or I don't understand why we don't see that this is a mirror of ourselves. The AI we create is our own mirror, and we need to understand also from that, like this paradox of our times. We humans create the global problems. The planet was fine without us, I think, in terms of climate change, right? In terms of pandemic diseases, where do they come from? They come from deforestation, from strange farming practices, etc., from lack of hygiene and so on. We created an imbalance, and this is called the Anthropocene. We are in control, but we are not able to control the problems that we have created. So I think there must be a major rethinking in the global governance debate, and unfortunately the times are rather going a bit in the opposite right now. But this is maybe another oxymoron in terms of what economists call destructive creation, or creative destruction, if you want. We are in a process of removing a lot of traditional instruments and international organizations in order to create new ones, and these are the signs that we need to follow, I think. I hope that answers a bit your great questions. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for your presentation. It was very interesting. Also, a lot of elements, innovative elements in the debate. So, a lot of thinking about. I was just curious about an aspect, because you underlined the tension between the global level and the national level. And you are based in Macau. So, as European, we are always, often, let's say, very proud about our legislative initiatives. So we are there are scholars very proud about the AI Act and the possible consequences of the AI Act. I was just curious about the perception in China, because we always talk about the Brussels effect and the force of the European legislation. So considering the fact that AI is a technology that has a global impact and a global nature, what's about the Chinese perspective on the AI?
I'm ready for the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good question. I would say the EU has done a great job since the 1950s. I mean, since it started with the Rome Treaties in many ways, and really provided a very persuasive model for the whole world. And China was always, I mean, since the opening up policy in the 1980s, following that. In ASEAN and also other players, the whole model of European integration, many legal instruments, I think, they were also studied, followed, and implemented. China has done and continues to do that very well. They study everything, and they're very curious, and they just study it. But then what they don't do is, and that's very important, they don't just create transplants. They say, oh, this is good, we take it, we put it. No, they study it, then they look, what do we have here? What part of this is useful here and what is not? In more cases than not, I think things are quite similar in the world anyways. And to narrow it down on AI, I think China studied the AI Act very carefully. And the EU did a great job in bringing it up, because it was then that there was a debate starting. As I said, if you don't say, re-put a law, you will not create some kind of interest, especially from those stakeholders that are enjoying the freedom, the unregulated freedom of these technologies for business models, right? Like, this is my concern with the ChatGPT. I mean, they are now, I don't know, like measured with billions of dollars, and all the copyrighted works of every one of us haven't seen a penny. But that's another story. And so China has also, for example, because you mentioned Macau. Macau is a very interesting place. It's a special administrative region of the People's Republic of China since the handover from Portuguese administration in 1999. And it is actually what I say, it's very similar to subsidiarity in a way, that it's a one country, two systems is the underlying principle. And Macau is both, I always, in my articles I always refer to it as an oxymoron. It's a local player, both local and global. And I remember I submitted an article to a journal about that, and they sent me back with a correction saying global, because they didn't understand that I meant an oxymoron, both local and global. Because Macau is a member of the World Trade Organization, separate from the People's Republic of China. So is Hong Kong, so is Chinese Taipei, by the way. And yet it is an integral part of the national, of the nation, the state of the People's Republic of China. So this shows that you can be both local and global at the same time, and we need to, the EU is struggling with the same thing. We don't know what the EU is. Is it a state? Is it a regional integration organization? It's what my professor Amato said at the time, it's an oxymoron. I think he said it was called in Italian a Trattato della Costituzione, no? And so it's because they asked me, is the baby after the convention, is it a boy or a girl? And it was both, because they couldn't decide on, convention would be more international law, trattato, like a constitution would be more domestic law, and trattato would be more international law. We don't have these distinctions. I mean, we should not have them anymore as we used to have them. And this is something where I see a very different mindset in China in particular. I think the language, the culture, the history has a very different approach to this kind of thinking of it's local or global, it's private or public, it's the economy or it's the government. No, they really have a tradition of holistic thinking that is also present and is also reflected a lot in the EU, but it is struggling with competing conceptions. We still, and now I think we are experiencing a bit of a setback in that holistic thinking in Europe. We go back and think again of member states versus member states, and not in terms of subsidiarity and so on, and maybe parallel competences in many ways, shared competences. I mean, so I think the key is that China is studying this very well and is trying to implement it. And I think now we need to discuss it together, because, and we can also see, I mean, the progress or the transformations in China in the last 40 years are beyond what you can imagine. I was lucky to have visited China the first time in 1986. In Beijing was a village on bikes, and then we took the train for 2 weeks from Beijing to Vienna. And the train from Beijing to the Russian border, Soviet border at the time, was a steam engine. And now I travel from Wuhan to Guangzhou, which is more than 1,000 kilometers in less than 4 hours. and the trains look like Star Trek to me. I mean, and so a lot of this development is happening there. And the other thing is, no one, I think, alone can get it right. We need to really define the use of these technologies together. But that is where the solution lies, and I think all these paradoxes of our times point, you know, it's not only AI, it's also climate change. You know, where is the action? It's locally here and there, but where are the big projects to tackle this problem? And I think it's the whole energy transition and so on and so forth. But the only way, I think, is communication, cooperation, and then some form of novel regulation, I think. I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much again. It was very much interesting. Few comments. Coming back, because I like it very much, the idea of paradox. At the very beginning, oxymoron, at the very beginning of the IA, the Artificial Intelligence Act, in the section where there are the reasons and objectives of the regulation, it is stated on the one hand, without on the one hand, we want to pursue this objective to protect people against possible uses of artificial intelligence. First one. Second, we want to deliver legal certainty as the background for technological innovation, economic growth. So, when I look at the article 5.1 letter A, I'm not sure that this kind of provision, which are necessary, which are very much necessary, you explained perfectly why they are necessary, I'm not sure that they will be able to provide legal certainty because of so many elements that are included in this definition. And for instance, subliminal technique, you have explained very well some scenarios in which there is the idea that we can exploit human cognitive biases or activities in order to manipulate or distort behavior. There is a very huge dominion in which, even without doing anything manipulative, we can have subliminal behavior for the very simple reasons that our action are not either intentional or unintentional. Many times when I'm doing something intentionally, I do also produce some unintentional data. And the capitalism of surveillance is very much related to us as unintentional sources of data. And when I, for instance, when I saw you a WhatsApp, the content of the WhatsApp is an intentional message data, which is encrypted and protected. But the time at which I send you this data, the number of times that I send you messages, the number of times that I send you messages compared to the rest of my friends are metadata that are produced and detected by artificial intelligence system outside, beyond, we can take any words that are produced as a result of an intentional act, but they are not encrypted, they are not protected. According to some interpretation, they are not even considered personal data. And we can wonder whether or not they belong to me, because they are produced thanks to, I can have an idea of how many times I send messages to you. I don't know precisely. So the precise information inferred from this data does not belong to me. And I think that you pointed out for me, the very big problem is this inference of data from data. Because what AI does is to infer unknown data from known data. Then all these unknown data tend to exceed the sphere of self-awareness and self-consciousness. So this article is applicable to really 95% of activities. And so how can we enforce this, it is very much difficult. Sometimes I do even think that if law is the right answer. And there is a paradox. I would call this paradox Dr. House paradox. When you are confronted to harm, to a problem, and Dr. House suggests a solution, it doesn't work. So you have two alternatives. Either you change the solution or you put more. And the is the idea that we need to put more regulation, more provisions, always more. I'm not sure that this raises problem of certainty, coordination, and so on. And even if I do agree that the problem is not only with regard to the risk, but also to the model, to this idea of inference and this idea of a certain knowledge that is produced throughout AI model. Because, for instance, AIA does not define a model of AI. The executive order defines AI models, coupled with AI and AI system, which means the epistemology of AI, which is not defined by the AIA. And I would just to add one more thing, because I do agree with you about cumulative harm. The problem is not just harm in itself, the problem is cumulative, because I do remember from long ago Eric Fromm distinction between the very fact that things change when we have cumulative effects. If I drink a glass of wine is fine, 2 is very fine, 3 is nice, 4 I start to being sick. So it not only changes, but something that is cool until a point, it can become bad after a while.
Thank you very much. That's great, and that's because there are so many levels to this debate all of a sudden. I mean, that's why it's a cross-cutting, complex phenomenon, and that should in itself give us some kind of like ideas. And I like very much how you said that we put more or we change the approach. And I think you're right. The Commission very much more. And the answer is in a paradox, like maybe less is more, right? And I really, I put all these thoughts in my previous book on the law in the time of oxymora. I think at this more general level and higher level of cognition, of human perception and so on, and the role of law also, I agree with you that I think the law as we have created it so far in the history of humanity will not function anymore. Like you know, I also can't see that a treaty, that we add an AI treaty to the WTO. Yeah. Exactly. Yes.
We perfectly know what is property or ownership. I don't understand what is control. We want to provide people with more control. What does it mean? What does it mean to provide people with more control? Because if you tell me that I have the right to property on this pen, I can sell it, I can donate, I can destroy. So I know what are my powers vis-a-vis to this pen. When someone tells me that we need to provide people with more control over their own data, for instance, I don't understand. What can I do?
Yeah. See, because you mentioned property, that's very interesting. Intellectual property is another oxymoron that we have used for many centuries actually to provide a fiction of you controlling ideas and the commercial exploitation of these ideas. So I think the key lies in we need to change the way we think. And that is, paradoxes play an important role. There's a book about the paradoxical brain. I even met the editor, a neuroscientist, and he says the brain itself is full of paradoxes. So we must accept them as not something beyond as something like only apparently true as such. Contradictions exist and they are real. They are not impossible. They are just showing us that we haven't reached the understanding we need to have. A paradox can only be solved with some higher understanding. You have to start from the same level where the problem arose, but you have to transcend it somehow. And I think there are two ways of doing that. And the oxymoron, that's what I wrote in my other book, and I use it also in this book. I call it legal anesthesia, synesthesia. We need to combine the law and the senses and the mind, the neuroscientific studies. And that starts by, that's why one of the last sentences was, synesthesia is a defragmentation technique. We have a lot of fragmentation in international law, and we have it nationally too. I worked for the government, and I was in the foreign ministry. We didn't talk to the Ministry of Trade. We didn't talk to the Ministry of maybe the foreign ministry was the one coordinating the most actually. But there's a lot of fragmentation, and the same is in the way we perceive the human being. We isolate what we see from what we hear. And only, these big tech companies, they know perfectly well that when you go to a restaurant, it's not just what you eat, what you taste. You need also some nice music, you need some nice temperature, you need some nice lighting, and then it has an effect. But we still treat like the human body as divided in this is what is pleasure, this is pain, this is what we feel or not, and so on. That doesn't work anymore. And I think this next step is that we should also consider, after changing our perception of human beings and all the cognition that comes with it, I think there is a possibility that we will discover new senses. I can't believe, like, if I go to the gym and every day I lift weight, the arm after 6 weeks will look differently. And we know we are bombarding our brain with data now in a way that we haven't done it, and I see my own children from the birth on now, a 2-year-old YouTube swipe, etc. It's all there. I can't believe that this doesn't stay without some kind of changes in the human sensory organ and human cognition. It will, and I think it already has. I think some younger generations my children are very different from me. So we need to simply engage in this process, follow the scientific developments, advances, and also accept them into the law, because we cannot, build our current or future legal framework on an understanding of the human beings that is based on the 19th century, maybe. No, it doesn't work. So, but very good. I think I'm very happy that you see that it's not only there are some questions that are very specific. What do we put in this sentence? But some questions are so global and inclusive, where we need to really address the fate of humanity as a whole. And that is a huge task. But it's also a very interesting time. And there's another paradox coming out of this that I've also addressed in another article about in a conference about the future of law. It's this paradox of a self-fulfilling prophecy, in a way, that we are now in this echo chamber, and with data, for example, it's very interesting. I read an article published by the United Nations University in Macau, the institute. They are now not only using data to train these models, but also synthetic data. So you are creating data which are artificially created in order to train future models. So it's becoming a hamster loop, and I don't know where this is going in terms of what is left for humans and what does it mean to be human and so on. But we need an active exchange and a debate like this everywhere, all the time. I think it's very crucial. Thanks a lot. I hope we can continue that debate.
Okay, Rostam, thank you, Professor Neuwirth. Thank you.